Captain Jake Morrison was enjoying his morning coffee when everything went wrong. Well, not exactly wrong, but definitely not right either. The Terra Nova was supposed to make a simple jump to Alpha Centauri to test their new faster-than-light drive. Instead, they had somehow traveled 3 times farther than anyone thought possible. "Captain, we have a problem," said Lisa Garcia from the navigation station. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the confusion underneath. "According to our instruments, we're nowhere near where we should be." Jake set down his coffee mug and walked over to look at her screen. Numbers and star charts filled the display, but none of them matched anything in their database. "How far off are we?" "About 1,500 light-years, sir. Give or take a few hundred." The bridge went quiet. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at the captain. 1,500 light-years was not a small navigation error. It was the kind of mistake that usually meant you were lost forever in the vast emptiness of space. But Jake just nodded and picked up his coffee again. "Well, that's interesting. Danny, are you picking up anything on the sensors?" Communications Officer Danny Rodriguez was already running scans. His eyes widened as data flowed across his screen. "Sir, you need to see this. There are structures out there. Big ones, and ships. Lots of ships." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the space around them. What they saw made everyone stop breathing for a moment. Massive metal structures floated in the darkness, each one the size of a small moon. Ships moved between them like busy ants, some so large they could have carried entire cities inside their hulls. "Those aren't human ships," whispered Amy Wright, the chief engineer. She had built engines and spacecraft her whole life, and nothing she was looking at followed any design she knew. Jake took another sip of his coffee and studied the scene. "No, they're definitely not ours. Danny, try to open a communication channel. Let's see if anyone wants to talk." "Sir, are you sure that's wise?" asked Dr. Helen Parker, the ship's science officer. "We don't know anything about these beings. They could be hostile. They could be friendly too," Jake replied with a shrug. "Only one way to find out." Danny worked at his console for several minutes, trying different frequencies and transmission methods. Finally, he looked up with excitement. "I'm getting something, Captain. It's coming through the universal translator, but the signal is strong." A voice filled the bridge, speaking in clear but formal English. "Unknown vessel, you have entered restricted Imperial space without authorization. This is a violation of Imperial law. Prepare to be boarded for identification and processing." The crew looked at each other nervously. Words like Imperial and restricted usually meant trouble. Big trouble, but Jake just smiled. "Danny, send them a reply. Tell them we're humans from Earth. We got a little lost during a test flight, and we'd be happy to talk things over." "Should I mention that we accidentally jumped into their space?" Danny asked. "Might as well be honest. Also ask if they have any good coffee. This stuff from the ship's replicator is terrible." Lisa stared at him. "Captain, did you just ask an alien empire for coffee recommendations?" "Good coffee is important, Lisa. Besides, it's a friendly gesture." Within minutes, Danny received a response. The alien voice sounded confused. "You wish to discuss beverage preferences? This is not standard protocol for first contact situations." Jake leaned back in his captain's chair and grinned. "Tell them we're not really big on standard protocol. We prefer to keep things simple and friendly." Dr. Parker shook her head in disbelief. "Captain, we've just made contact with what appears to be a galactic empire, and you're treating it like a casual conversation with neighbors. Why not? They're people too, just from somewhere else. No reason to make it complicated." The alien voice came through again, this time sounding even more confused. "Your vessel will be escorted to Station Omega-7 for proper first contact procedures. Do not attempt to leave or you will be detained by force." "Sounds fair," Jake said. "Danny, tell them we'll follow their lead. Also mention that we have some Earth music they might enjoy, cultural exchange and all that." As alien ships appeared around them, sleek and powerful vessels that could have destroyed the Terra Nova without effort, the human crew watched with curiosity rather than fear. The ships were beautiful in their own way, covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow across their hulls. "Those are some impressive ships," Amy said, studying them through the view screen. "I wonder how their engines work." "Maybe we can ask," Jake replied. "I bet their engineers would love to compare notes." Lisa looked at him like he had grown a second head. "Captain, we're being escorted by alien warships to an unknown station in the middle of nowhere, and you want to talk shop with their mechanics?" "Why not? Engineers love talking about their work. Doesn't matter what species they are. The journey to Station Omega-7 took several hours. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive structure that seemed to stretch on forever. Docking bays large enough to hold entire fleets open to receive them. The Terra Nova looked like a toy boat next to the alien vessels already docked there. As they prepared to meet their first aliens, Jake gathered his crew in the briefing room. Remember, we're guests here. Be polite, be curious, and try not to break anything. Other than that, just be yourselves. And what if they're hostile? Asked Dr. Parker. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But so far, they've been pretty reasonable. They could have just blown us up. But instead, they're following proper procedures. That's actually a good sign. Danny raised his hand. Captain, what if we accidentally start an interstellar war by saying the wrong thing? Jake thought about this for a moment. Then I guess we'll have an interesting story to tell when we get home. But let's try to avoid that if possible. As the Terra Nova settled into its assigned docking bay, Jake could see alien figures moving around outside. They were about to meet beings from another world. Representatives of what seemed to be a vast galactic civilization. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Jake found himself looking forward to it. New people to meet, new things to learn, new problems to solve. What could be more exciting than that? He finished his coffee and stood up. All right, everyone. Let's go make some new friends. The crew followed him toward the airlock, stepping into the unknown with the same casual confidence they brought to everything else. Behind them, the Terra Nova powered down its engines, settling in for what would probably be a very interesting stay. Admiral Zethkri had handled first contact situations 23 times during his long career with the Imperial fleet. He knew the procedures by heart. New species were typically frightened, aggressive, or desperately trying to prove they were worthy of joining the Empire. None of them had ever asked about the local entertainment networks or invited him to something called a poker game. The humans had been aboard Station Omega-7 for exactly 4 hours, and they had already turned his carefully organized facility upside down. Not through violence or chaos, but through sheer friendliness and an alarming lack of concern about proper protocol. Sir, the human captain is asking if our mess hall serves anything besides nutrition paste, reported his aide, a nervous young officer named Tokhtar. He says their cook would be happy to prepare something called hamburgers for the evening meal. Zethkri stared at the report on his desk. In 4,000 years of Imperial history, no alien species had ever offered to cook dinner for their captors. What did you tell him? I said I would ask you, sir. Also, their doctor wants to know if our medical bay needs any help. She noticed that several of our staff members looked tired and offered to check if they have something called vitamin deficiency. The Admiral rubbed his temples. The humans were supposed to be in quarantine while the Imperial Council decided what to do with them. Instead, they were somehow socializing with his crew and offering medical advice. Where are they now? Last I checked, Captain Morrison was in Engineering Bay 3 helping Chief Mechanic Grixtel fix the atmospheric recycling system. The human engineer Amy Wright is showing our technicians something called percussive maintenance. Percussive what? Hitting things with a hammer until they work properly, sir. Apparently it's very effective. Zethkri decided he needed to see this for himself. He made his way to Engineering Bay 3, expecting to find chaos and confusion. Instead, he found his maintenance crew gathered around Amy Wright, watching her explain how to fix a plasma conduit that had been broken for 6 months. The problem is you're overthinking it, Amy was saying to a group of fascinated alien technicians. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. This connection here is just stuck. Give it a good whack right there and it should work fine. She demonstrated by tapping the conduit with a small hammer. Immediately, the system hummed to life, displaying green lights across the control panel. The alien technicians looked amazed. They had been trying to fix that conduit using advanced diagnostic equipment and complex repair procedures. The human had fixed it in 30 seconds with a hammer. How did you know where to hit it? Asked one of the technicians. Experience, Amy replied with a grin. After a while, you learn to listen to what the machine is telling you. This one was just asking for a little encouragement. Zethkri watched in fascination as his crew began asking Amy about other broken systems around the station. She seemed genuinely happy to help, offering suggestions and showing them techniques that were both simple and effective. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison was having an animated conversation with Chief Mechanic Grixtel about engine design. The two of them were sketching diagrams on a portable tablet. comparing notes on faster-than-light travel. "Your Imperial drives are impressive," Morrison was saying, "but they seem awfully complicated. All those safety systems and backup protocols must slow things down considerably." "Safety is paramount," Grixtal replied. "Imperial regulations require 17 different backup systems for any FTL drive." 17? Wow, we usually just build them tough and hope for the best. Seems to work out okay most of the time. Grixtal looked horrified. "But what if something goes wrong?" Morrison shrugged. "Then we figure out how to fix it. That's what engineers are for, right?" This casual attitude toward potentially catastrophic system failures should have been terrifying. Instead, Grixtal found himself intrigued by the human approach to problem-solving. Zethkri continued his tour of the station, finding humans scattered throughout his facility. Dr. Helen Parker was in the science labs, discussing quantum physics with Imperial researchers. Her explanations were clear and easy to understand, even for concepts that usually required years of study. "The key thing to remember," she was telling a group of confused scientists, "is that quantum mechanics isn't trying to be mysterious. It just works differently than regular physics. Once you accept that, everything else makes sense." One of the researchers, a crystalline being named Shimet, raised a tentacle. "But the mathematical proofs are extraordinarily complex." "Only because you're making them complex," Helen replied. "Let me show you a simpler way to think about it." She began drawing diagrams on a whiteboard, explaining quantum principles using analogies and simple examples. Within an hour, she had taught the research team concepts that typically took months to understand. In the medical bay, Dr. Kate Sullivan was examining a Vrillian crew member who had been suffering from a chronic pain condition for years. Imperial doctors had tried dozens of treatments without success. Kate said, studying the patient's scans. "This looks like nerve inflammation. On Earth, we'd try a combination of anti-inflammatory medication and physical therapy. Have you tried anything like that?" The Imperial medical officer, Dr. Velshan, looked confused. "Physical therapy? Exercises to strengthen the surrounding muscles and improve circulation. Sometimes the best medicine is just getting the body to heal itself." Kate showed them several simple exercises that could help reduce the patient's pain. They were basic movements that any species could perform, but the Imperial medical staff watched as if she were performing magic. By the end of the day, Admiral Zethkri found himself facing a crisis unlike anything in Imperial history. The humans had not only made friends with his crew, but they had also solved more problems in 8 hours than his staff typically handled in a month. His communications officer brought him the latest reports. "Sir, 14 different departments are requesting permission to work with the humans. Engineering wants to learn their maintenance techniques. Medical wants to study their treatment methods. Science wants to collaborate on research projects. And the Imperial Council? They're demanding a full report on why our station is suddenly operating at peak efficiency for the first time in decades." Zethkri looked out the window of his office, watching human crew members walking through the corridors alongside his own people. They were laughing and talking together as if they had known each other for years instead of hours. "Sir, what should I tell the council?" The Admiral thought about this for a long moment. How could he explain that these humans had revolutionized his station simply by being helpful and friendly? How could he describe their casual approach to problems that had stumped Imperial experts? "Tell them," he said finally, "that we may need to reconsider our first contact protocols." As if summoned by his thoughts, Captain Morrison appeared at his office door. "Admiral, sorry to bother you, but my crew was wondering if you'd like to join us for dinner. Kate managed to talk your food replicators into making something that actually tastes good." Zethkri stared at him. "You want me to have dinner with you?" "Sure, why not? Good food, good company, maybe a few stories about space travel. Could be fun." The Admiral realized he couldn't remember the last time anyone had invited him to dinner, just for the pleasure of his company. Imperial protocol was full of formal meals and ceremonial banquets, but nobody ever just shared a friendly meal. "I would be honored," he said, and meant it. As they walked toward the mess hall together, Zethkri wondered what other surprises these humans had in store for the Empire. The bureaucratic crisis began on a Tuesday morning when Lieutenant Ben Clark decided to help fix what he thought was a broken door. It turned out to be the main security gate for the station's restricted research section, and his repairs had accidentally given every crew member on the station access to classified Imperial technology databases. How did he even do this? Asked Security Chief Mordak, staring at his control panels in confusion. This system has 17 different encryption layers and quantum-locked access codes. Ben scratched his head and looked embarrassed. Sorry about that. I just noticed the door was sticking, so I figured I'd take a look at the mechanism. The whole security system seemed way more complicated than it needed to be, so I simplified it a bit. You simplified a quantum encryption system? Well, yeah. It was pretty straightforward once I figured out what all those extra parts were for. Most of them weren't actually doing anything useful, so I took them out. Mordak stared at the human in disbelief. The security system that Ben had simplified was considered one of the most advanced in the Empire. Imperial engineers had spent decades perfecting its design. Ben had improved it in 20 minutes using what he called common sense and a screwdriver. Meanwhile, Dr. Kate Sullivan was causing her own crisis in the medical bay. She had been treating patients from 17 different species, using techniques she freely admitted she was making up as she went along. The problem was that her success rate was better than most Imperial doctors who had trained for decades. I don't understand it, Dr. Velshan told his colleague Dr. Hickstal. She uses equipment wrong, ignores half our safety protocols, and somehow gets better results than our most experienced physicians. They watched through the observation window as Kate examined a Zephyrian patient who had been suffering from a rare metabolic disorder. Instead of running the standard battery of tests that would take hours to complete, she simply asked the patient to describe how they felt and what hurt. On Earth, we have a saying, Kate explained to the patient. Sometimes the best diagnosis comes from just listening to what the patient tells you. Your symptoms sound like what we'd call an allergic reaction. Have you eaten anything unusual lately? The patient mentioned trying a new type of imported fruit the day before. Kate suggested avoiding that fruit and prescribed a simple antihistamine. Within an hour, the patient was feeling much better. Dr. Velshan had been treating the same condition with complex molecular therapy and experimental medications for 3 weeks without success. Kate had solved it by asking one question and giving the patient something equivalent to what humans would buy at a pharmacy. She's making us look incompetent, Dr. Hickstal whispered. No, Velshan replied thoughtfully. She's making us realize we've been making things too complicated. The biggest crisis of all was developing in the diplomatic wing, where Ryan Hughes had accidentally agreed to represent humanity in formal trade negotiations with 3 different star systems. The problem was that Ryan was not a diplomat. He was the Terra Nova's communications specialist who had been trained to fix radios and manage data networks. I thought it was just a dinner party, Ryan explained to Captain Morrison over the communication link. They were really friendly, asking about Earth and our culture. When they started talking about trade agreements, I figured they just wanted to know what kind of stuff we might be interested in trading. What exactly did you agree to? Morrison asked, though he was trying not to laugh. Well, they were fascinated by our agricultural techniques, so I told them about crop rotation and soil management. Apparently that constituted a binding agricultural alliance with the Centauri Federation. Then I mentioned our music and entertainment industries, which somehow became a cultural exchange treaty with the Vegan Republic. And the third one? That was when I showed them pictures of Earth cities and explained how our transportation systems work. Turns out I accidentally negotiated an infrastructure development contract with the Orion Trade Alliance. Morrison shook his head in amazement. Ryan, you've accomplished more in one dinner than most career diplomats manage in years. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure yet. We'll find out when the paperwork gets to Earth. Admiral Zethkri was dealing with reports from all over the station. In the past week, humans had solved problems that had been bothering his staff for months or even years. They had improved efficiency in every department they visited. They had made friends with crew members from dozens of different species, and they had completely ignored every rule and regulation that made the Imperial bureaucracy function. The problem was that everything was working better than it ever had before. Sir, we have a request from the engineering department, Tokhtar reported. They want to officially adopt the human maintenance protocols for all non-critical systems. What about the science division? They're asking permission to collaborate with Dr. Parker on a new faster-than-light research project. Apparently her theories could revolutionize space travel. And medical, Dr. Sullivan has been invited to lecture at the Imperial Medical Academy. They want her to teach a course on something called practical diagnosis. Zethkri looked at the growing stack of reports on his desk. Every department on the station wanted to work with the humans. More concerning, several other Imperial installations had heard about what was happening on Station Omega-7 and were requesting human advisors of their own. Tok'tar, get me a direct line to Imperial Command. I think they need to know what's happening here. The call to Imperial Command went about as well as expected. Grand Admiral Thekron listened to Zethkri's report with growing disbelief. You're telling me that 7 humans have reorganized your entire station in less than a week? Yes, sir. They've improved efficiency across all departments, solved numerous technical problems, and somehow made everyone happier to be at work. And they did this by ignoring our established procedures. Not ignoring them, sir. They just approached problems differently. They seemed to prefer simple solutions over complex ones. There was a long pause on the communication line. Admiral Zethkri, I've received similar reports from 3 other installations that have encountered these humans. The Emperor himself is asking questions. Zethkri felt his stomach drop. When the Emperor asked questions, people usually found themselves reassigned to very unpleasant posts in very remote locations. Sir, the humans haven't done anything wrong. They've been helpful and friendly throughout their stay. I know, Admiral. That's what makes this so unusual. In 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, we've never encountered a species that improved our operations simply by being themselves. What are your orders, sir? Prepare a detailed report on everything that's happened. Include examples of their problem-solving methods and their effects on station operations. The Emperor wants to meet these humans personally. After the call ended, Zethkri sat in his office thinking about what the next few days might bring. An Imperial audience was a huge honor, but it was also dangerous. The Emperor had absolute power over the fate of entire worlds. A single wrong word could doom humanity before they even had a chance to establish themselves in the galaxy. He decided to talk to Captain Morrison about it. If anyone could handle meeting the most powerful being in known space, it would probably be the human who had asked for coffee recommendations during first contact. He found Morrison in the recreation area, teaching a group of off-duty crew members how to play poker. The game had become wildly popular throughout the station, with players from a dozen different species gathered around tables, laughing and trying to read each other's expressions. Captain, I need to speak with you privately. Morrison looked up from his cards. Sure thing, Admiral. Let me just finish this hand. He played his cards with the same casual confidence he brought to everything else. Won the hand with what he called a full house, and then followed Zethkri to a quiet corner of the room. What's on your mind, Admiral? You've been summoned to meet the Emperor. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. That sounds important. Is it formal dress or will my regular uniform be okay? Zethkri stared at him.
Captain, do you understand what this means?
The Emperor rules over 4,000 star systems. He controls the fate of trillions of beings. Many species wait centuries for the honor of an Imperial audience. Sounds like a busy guy, Morrison replied. I hope we can help him out with whatever he needs. As Zethkri watched Morrison return to his poker game, he realized that the humans were about to either impress the Emperor beyond measure or accidentally insult the most powerful being in the galaxy. Either way, it was going to be interesting. Chief Administrator Velhan had built his career on the foundation of proper procedures and careful bureaucracy. In 3 centuries of Imperial service, he had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with the right forms filled out in the correct order. Then Amy Wright walked into his office and destroyed his entire worldview in less than 5 minutes. You know, Amy said, looking at the massive pile of infrastructure reports covering Velhan's desk. If you just sort these by actual importance instead of filing date, you could probably clear this backlog in about a week. Velhan stared at her. The reports represented 2 years of accumulated maintenance requests, upgrade proposals, and efficiency analyses from stations across the sector. Imperial procedure required that each report be processed in the order it was received, regardless of content or urgency. The filing system is designed to ensure fairness, he explained. Every request receives equal consideration based on when it was submitted. Amy picked up a report from the middle of the pile and read the header. This one is requesting emergency repairs to a water recycling system that affects 3 million people. This one on top is asking for upgraded carpet in an administrative office. You're really going to make 3 million people wait for water while you debate carpet colors? Imperial regulations clearly state, Imperial regulations are making you prioritize carpet over drinking water, Amy interrupted. That doesn't seem very smart. She began sorting the reports into different piles, grouping them by urgency and importance. Emergency repairs in one pile, critical infrastructure upgrades in another, routine maintenance requests in a third, and cosmetic improvements in a fourth. There, she said, stepping back from her work. Now you can handle the important stuff first and worry about the carpet later. Velhan looked at the newly organized piles. Amy's system made perfect sense, but it violated centuries of established procedure. He should have rejected her suggestions and returned to the proper filing order. Instead, he found himself picking up the first report from the emergency pile. It was indeed about a failing water system that served millions of beings. The solution was straightforward and could be implemented immediately. He approved it with a quick electronic signature and moved on to the next report. By the end of the day, Velhan had processed more critical infrastructure requests than he typically handled in a month. The work that should have taken years to complete was suddenly manageable. Similar transformations were happening throughout the imperial bureaucracy. Wherever humans offered suggestions, centuries-old problems began disappearing with alarming speed. On Station Beta 9, Ben Clark had shown the maintenance crew how to fix their perpetually broken artificial gravity generators. The solution involved replacing a single component that cost less than most administrators spent on lunch. Imperial engineers had been designing elaborate workarounds for decades, never realizing that the problem was just one worn-out part. "Why didn't anyone think of this before?" asked Chief Engineer Vexhai. "Because you were thinking too hard," Ben replied. "Sometimes the simple answer is the right answer." At the Imperial Medical Center on Proxima Station, Kate Sullivan had revolutionized patient care by introducing something she called bedside manner. Instead of treating patients as collections of symptoms to be analyzed, she talked to them like people, asked about their lives, and showed genuine concern for their well-being. The results were remarkable. Patient satisfaction scores reached levels that Imperial medical administrators didn't know were possible. More importantly, patients were healing faster when they felt that their doctors actually cared about them. "How is this working so well?" Dr. Claxton asked his colleague. "She's using the same treatments we've always used." "It's not what she's doing," replied Dr. Morsan. "It's how she's doing it. She makes patients feel like they matter." The Imperial Academy of Sciences was struggling with its own crisis. Helen Parker had been invited to present her theories on faster-than-light travel, and her ideas were so simple that the Academy's most distinguished researchers felt embarrassed they hadn't thought of them first. "The problem with current FTL theory," Helen explained to a room full of brilliant scientists, "is that you're overcomplicating the math. Space-time isn't trying to be difficult. It follows certain rules, and once you understand those rules, everything else becomes straightforward." She filled 3 blackboards with equations that were elegant in their simplicity. Concepts that typically required years of study to understand became clear in a single lecture. Professor Zickmal, who had spent his entire career studying faster-than-light physics, raised a tentacle. "Dr. Parker, these equations suggest that we could improve FTL efficiency by 60%, with relatively minor modifications to existing drive systems." "Probably more than that," Helen replied. "Your current drives are doing a lot of unnecessary work. Strip out the redundant calculations and focus on what actually matters, and you'll be surprised how much faster they can go." The implications were staggering. If Helen was right, the Empire could revolutionize space travel using technology they already possessed. They just needed to stop making it so complicated. Emperor Thakron was receiving reports from across the Empire, and each one told the same impossible story. Humans were solving problems that had stumped Imperial experts for generations. They were doing it quickly, efficiently, and with methods so simple that they seemed almost insulting. The Emperor had ruled for over 1,000 years. He had seen technological marvels and diplomatic triumphs that would have amazed previous generations. But he had never encountered anything like this. "Explain to me again how 7 humans have improved Imperial operations across 14 different installations," he said to his chief advisor, an ancient being named Counselor Zephyron. "They identify problems and fix them, Your Majesty, but they approach problems differently than we do. Where we see complex challenges requiring elaborate solutions, they see simple issues with obvious answers. Give me an example." the chronic food shortage on mining station Gamma 4. Our economists and logistics experts have been working on this problem for 3 years. They've proposed 17 different solutions involving resource reallocation, supply chain optimization, and dietary modification programs. And the human solution? Captain Morrison asked why they didn't just grow their own food. The station has plenty of unused space and adequate environmental controls. Dr. Parker showed them how to set up hydroponic gardens using materials they already had. The food shortage was solved in 2 weeks. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. They solved a 3-year resource crisis by suggesting that hungry people grow food. Yes, Your Majesty. And this is typical of their problem-solving approach? Very typical. They seem to prefer simple, direct solutions over complex theoretical frameworks. The Emperor had built his empire on the strength of advanced technology, sophisticated bureaucracy, and careful long-term planning. The idea that many of their most persistent problems had simple solutions was both exciting and deeply unsettling. What do our analysts think about these humans? They're confused, Your Majesty. By every standard measure, humans should be a primitive species. Their technology is less advanced than ours, their government is relatively simple, and they have no formal empire to speak of. Yet they consistently outperform our best experts in practical problem-solving. How is that possible? We believe it's a cultural difference. Humans seem to value practical results over theoretical perfection. They're willing to try simple solutions first, rather than spending years developing complex ones. They also appear to have what they call common sense, which allows them to see obvious solutions that we miss because we're looking for sophisticated answers. The Emperor considered this information carefully. The Galactic Empire had become the dominant force in the galaxy, through superior technology and careful organization, but perhaps they had become too sophisticated for their own good. Perhaps they had forgotten that the best solution was often the simplest one. Counselor Zephyron, I want to meet these humans personally. Are you certain, Your Majesty? First contact protocols recommend a gradual introduction process spanning several months. I think we can skip the protocols this time. These humans seem to prefer direct approaches, and frankly, I'm curious to meet the people who are casually revolutionizing our civilization. As preparations began for the imperial audience, administrators throughout the empire were quietly adopting human methods. They called it practical efficiency in their reports. But privately, they were learning to value simple solutions over complex procedures. The Galactic Empire, ancient and mighty, was discovering that sometimes the most profound changes came not from new technology or grand strategies, but from the simple wisdom of approaching problems with fresh eyes and common sense. The humans had arrived by accident, but they were changing everything on purpose. The Imperial throne room was designed to inspire awe and demonstrate the absolute power of the Emperor. Massive columns stretched up into shadows. Holographic displays showed the vast extent of the empire, and the throne itself seemed to float in a pool of light that made the Emperor appear almost godlike. Captain Jake Morrison walked into this temple of power, looked around appreciatively, and said, "Wow, this place is really something. You must have a great interior decorator." Emperor Thakron had been expecting many possible reactions to his throne room: awe, fear, desperate attempts to show respect, or perhaps hostile defiance. He had not expected a compliment about his interior design choices. "Thank you," the Emperor replied, somewhat taken aback. "The architecture is meant to represent the strength and permanence of the Empire." "Well, it definitely does that." "Very impressive. So you're the guy in charge of this whole operation?" Counselor Zephyron made a choking sound that might have been horror or suppressed laughter. In 3,000 years of imperial audiences, no one had ever referred to the Emperor as the guy in charge. But Thakron found himself genuinely amused by the human's casual approach. "I am indeed the Emperor of this domain, and you, Captain Morrison, are the human who has been accidentally revolutionizing my empire." "Well, accidentally is the key word there. We were just trying to be helpful. Your people have been really nice to us, so we figured we should return the favor." Jake looked around the throne room again, noting the various officials and advisors standing at respectful distances. "Is this where you handle all the day-to-day Empire business? Seems like it would be pretty inconvenient for regular meetings." "Most administrative work is handled in the Imperial offices," Thakron explained. "This chamber is reserved for formal ceremonies and important audiences." "That makes sense. All this marble and fancy lighting would probably give me a headache if I had to work here every day." The Emperor found himself laughing, a sound that hadn't been heard in the throne room for decades. Captain Morrison, in all my years of rule, I have never had an audience quite like this one. Really? That's too bad. Casual conversation is usually the best way to get to know someone. Indeed. Tell me, what do your people want from the Empire? Jake thought about this for a moment. Honestly, we just want to explore, learn new things, maybe make some friends along the way. We're not really interested in conquering anybody or getting conquered ourselves. Seems like it would involve way too much paperwork. You have no territorial ambitions? No desire for resources or strategic advantages? Not really. Earth has everything we need for now, and space is big enough for everyone. We figure there's plenty of room for all of us to do our own thing without stepping on each other's toes. Thakran had ruled an empire built on expansion, resource acquisition, and strategic dominance. The idea of a spacefaring species with no imperial ambitions was completely foreign to him. What about your government? Surely they have plans for establishing colonies or expanding your influence. Our government mostly just tries to keep things running smoothly back home. They're probably pretty excited about meeting you folks, but I don't think they're planning to invade anyone. Too much work, and most politicians prefer problems they can solve with committee meetings. The Emperor leaned forward in his throne, genuinely curious about these strange beings. Captain, your species fascinates me. In 3,000 years of expansion, the Empire has encountered over 400 different civilizations. Most either cower in fear when they meet us, or they immediately begin plotting how to use our technology for their own advancement. You offered to teach my staff poker. Well, poker's a great way to get to know people. Plus, Admiral Zethkri seemed like he'd be good at bluffing. He is indeed skilled at maintaining a composed demeanor under pressure. See? I knew it. You should join us for a game sometime. We've got quite the tournament going on back at the station. The idea of the Emperor of the Galaxy playing poker with a group of aliens in a station recreation room was so absurd that it somehow seemed perfectly reasonable. I may take you up on that offer, Thakran said. But first I need to address a more serious matter. Your people have been solving problems throughout my empire with remarkable efficiency. My advisors are calling it the greatest improvement in imperial operations in centuries. That's nice to hear. Your people are pretty smart. They just seem to be making things more complicated than they needed to be. Explain. Jake scratched his head, thinking about how to put it diplomatically. Well, from what I've seen, you folks have a tendency to overthink problems. You've got all these procedures and protocols and backup systems, which is great for important stuff. But sometimes a simple solution works just as well. Give me an example. The food shortage on that mining station. Your experts were developing all these complex supply chain modifications and dietary programs. But the station had plenty of space and good environmental controls. Why not just grow food there? Saves transportation costs, provides fresh food, and gives the workers something interesting to do in their spare time. Thakran nodded slowly. And this is typical of human problem solving? Pretty much. We usually try the simple approach first. If that doesn't work, then we start getting creative. But you'd be surprised how often the obvious solution is the right one. Your methods have been effective, thanks. Though I have to say, your people are fast learners. Once they get the hang of thinking simply, they come up with great ideas on their own. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment, considering everything he had learned about these humans. They were not advanced enough to threaten the Empire militarily. They had no territorial ambitions or imperial designs, but they possessed something that the Empire had lost over its millennia of growth and complexity: the wisdom of simplicity. Captain Morrison, I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. The Empire would like to offer humanity a formal alliance, not as subjects or vassals, but as equals. In exchange for sharing your problem-solving methods and practical wisdom, the Empire would provide you with advanced technology, protection, and access to our trade networks. Jake considered this carefully. That sounds reasonable, but I should probably check with my government before making any big commitments. Though I'm pretty sure they'd be interested, of course. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, I would like to offer you and your crew permanent positions as Imperial advisors. You would have the freedom to travel throughout the Empire, helping solve problems and sharing your methods with our administrators. That could be fun. We'd get to see new places, meet new people, maybe fix a few things along the way. Yeah, I think my crew would enjoy that. Excellent. I will have my staff prepare the necessary documents. One question, though. This advisor position, does it come with a fancy title? Because Amy Wright has been joking about wanting to be called Chief Universal Problem Solver. The Emperor smiled. I believe we can arrange something appropriately impressive. 6 months later, human advisors could be found throughout Imperial space. They traveled in small teams, visiting stations and planets where their practical approach to problem solving was most needed. Wherever they went, efficiency improved, morale increased, and problems that had seemed impossible began finding simple solutions. The Terra Nova had been refitted with Imperial technology and served as the flagship of the first human Imperial Joint Exploration Fleet. Captain Morrison still insisted on serving real coffee at all senior staff meetings, and poker night had become a regular tradition throughout the fleet. Amy Wright had indeed been given the title Chief Universal Problem Solver, along with an official Imperial commission and a budget that allowed her to fix anything she deemed insufficiently efficient. She was in constant demand throughout the Empire. Dr. Kate Sullivan had established the Imperial Academy of Practical Medicine, teaching young doctors from dozens of species that sometimes the best treatment was simply listening to patients and caring about their well-being. The Galactic Empire had been transformed, not through conquest or technology, but through the radical idea that most problems had simple solutions if you just looked at them the right way. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, Earth received regular reports about humanity's newest allies, along with detailed accounts of the adventures their people were having among the stars. As Jake Morrison often said while watching Imperial crews adopt human methods with enthusiastic success, turns out the universe is a pretty friendly place once you get to know it. The Empire, ancient and mighty, had learned to value wisdom over complexity, and both civilizations were better for it. Sometimes the most important discoveries came not from exploring new worlds, but from seeing familiar problems with fresh eyes and an open mind. The humans had entered galactic civilization by accident, but they had found their place in it through the simple approach they brought to everything. Be helpful, be curious, and trust that things would probably work out fine in the end. Most of the time they did.